will now. So we spoke about the main features of the Buddhist Tantra, and also one thing that I want to explain to you is that when it comes to actual practice of the Tantra, if you look at the actual sadhana practice, there is, it presupposes that you have some understanding and experience of emptiness, because almost all the sadhana practices begin with meditation on emptiness on the basis of using a Sanskrit phrase like Om Svabhava Shuddha Sva Sarva Dharma or Shunyata, and even a Tibetan phrase, but it presupposes that you are able to kind of meditate on emptiness and then use that as the basis. And in fact, the foundation of many of the Vajrayana practice is the deity yoga. And deity yoga involves reflecting upon emptiness and then imagining that very mind, realizing emptiness as arising in the form of the deity of your meditation. So it is the realization of emptiness that is being imagined as arising as deity. So what it presupposes is to have at least some understanding of the teaching on emptiness, and also some kind of emotional connection, kind of an affinity with the teaching on emptiness. Without these two, there isn't even the basis for doing this deity yoga practice. And then similarly, one of the important practices of the Vajrayana is to be able to adopt a kind of an attitude, a way of being, where you perceive everything that you see as manifestations of the deity, meditation deity, all sounds as reflections of the mantra, and all your thoughts and emotions as arising of wisdom. Now, those three things, again, unless you have some understanding of emptiness, some realization of the truth of emptiness, there isn't the basis for those kind of cultivation. So, what is required is, deeper understanding of emptiness as the foundation for doing Vajrayana tantric practice. And also, one uniqueness of the Vajrayana practice is the sophistication and the richness that we find in the actual meditation techniques in the specific types of practice. And particularly in the highest yoga tantra, there is the possibility of utilizing your subtle consciousness, subtle mind, not just ordinary mind of thoughts and concepts, or the intellect, but even the very subtle mind as a way of turning into the path and realizing emptiness on that basis. And it is said that, understanding of emptiness that takes place at the gross level of mind, of intellect, and if you compare that to the realization of emptiness at the subtle level of consciousness, the latter one is far more powerful in terms of dealing with afflictions and all the negative emotions and so on. So this is where the uniqueness and the special characteristic and the richness of Vajrayana comes into the picture, and also the final antidote for eliminating all the subtle obscurations to knowledge can only be effected if we can bring the realization of emptiness at this very fundamental, subtle level of consciousness, not at the gross level of mind. And that is only possible if you are able to cultivate the Vajrayana path. So this is something that I think, so one's understanding of the Vajrayana must be really grounded in this kind of understanding. So therefore, the point is that without the foundational knowledge of the Buddha's teaching, without some experience of the foundational teachings like no self, impermanence, and particularly the teaching on emptiness, there isn't any basis for building the Vajrayana tantric path. So I think it's important to recognize this, because otherwise sometimes Vajrayana practices become kind of a form of a ritual. In Tibet we have many monasteries, and in many of these monasteries the monks simply do rituals. And in fact, I remember once in Ladakh, which is a place I visit quite often, one day we were having lunch with some government officials, some of them I know very well. And in the conversation, I spoke about the fact that according to Buddhism, there are two ways of upholding the Dharma. One is to uphold the Dharma by teaching and studying. This is one way of upholding the Dharma. The second way of upholding the Dharma is to make Dharma real through one's own practice and realization. And so then this government official, who was a friend, told me that actually, to be frank, there are many monasteries in Ladakh where neither of these two are done. The only thing the monks do is beat drums and chant and do rituals. So, and this is true in Tibet as well. We have many monasteries in Tibet where the monks only learn how to chant and do the rituals and beat the drums. So I think it is important to remember, what is the essence and the significance of these teachings, and what is the essence of the actual practice. It may seem like some of you might feel that the Dalai Lama is always complaining about things. My approach is to be frank. If there are flaws and shortcomings in the tradition and the system, it's better to be upfront and explicit and acknowledge them rather than pretending everything is okay, because pretension is a form of self-deception. So I think it is important to know this. And also I want to share with you that if you take the practice seriously, if you take the teaching seriously and implement it into your life, there's a real power in the practice. For example, for us Buddhist practitioners, we have two principal enemies. One is the self-cherishing, excessive self-cherishing thought and attitude. The other one is the grasping at of self-existence. So those are the two enemies. Now, how do we overcome them? How do we deal with them? It's not enough simply to close your eyes and make the wish and pray, may these self-cherishing attitude and may self-grasping disappear. It's not going to go away by simply making the prayer and aspiring for it. What needs to be done is to really understand how they manifest, where they are rooted, what are their antidotes. And the antidote to self-cherishing is very well explained in texts like Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Bodhicharya Avatara, where there is an extensive explanation of how to tackle our deep-rooted self-cherishing attitudes and so on. And similarly, and this is something that knowledge alone is not enough. First of all, you have to reflect deeply and from many different angles. Then secondly, you have to reflect again and again and again and again. And thirdly, you have to reflect it over a prolonged period of time. So it's from many different perspectives, over and over again, over a long period of time. And through the combination of that, then you begin to see a real impact. Similarly, when it comes to dealing with self-grasping, again, reflecting deeply from all sorts of ways on the teaching on emptiness, then meditating and contemplating this again and again and over a long period of time, then you really begin to see a change. I'm not claiming that I've realized emptiness, but I can assure you that I'm kind of almost there. And this is not to really boast, but to really make the point that if you make an effort, there really is an impact and a power. In my case, now it's been about 60 years since I started taking these practices seriously. And I can assure you that the power of practice and understanding of the teaching is really tremendous. For example, the way in which they impact my emotional, kind of life, the way in which they impact the emotional reactivity, dampening of predisposition towards anger, strong emotions, negative emotions, and so on. It's the power of practice is really felt in those kind of areas. So the point I want to make is that, it is only through understanding and practicing over time that you can begin to see a real transformation.
Oh yeah.
So therefore, faith alone is not enough. Of course, as practicing Buddhists, faith in the Dharma is very important. There is a scriptural quotation which says that the faith is the foundation of all good qualities. But faith alone is not enough. The faith needs to be grounded and accompanied with an ability to use your intelligence to understand the Dharma and then make it real in your practice.
Oh, yeah. So Buddhism in general, particularly Nalanda tradition, see, we have to utilize our intelligence maximum way, through that way transform our emotion. That's the way. So knowledge, very important. In order to gain knowledge, study, very, very important. Now, for example, my own case, now, as I mentioned earlier, now I am quite old person. So now time come, relax. But still I consider myself as a student. Whenever some time there, I always read and think. I always. And every day, each day, about 5 hours, some meditation. Mainly analytical meditation. Thinking, analyze, thinking. Really very, very helpful. So Tibetan Buddhist tradition is usually I call Nalanda tradition.